the reason that Extinction Rebellion Roads Rebellion has come into existence is because we so desperately need to challenge the largest emitting sector in the UK, which of course is transport. And it's insane that at this time, when we are facing an existential crisis, we have a government that is spending £27 billion on building building new roads and maintaining roads in the UK. So that's my part over. If I can hand over to Chris Todd to go next, if he is there. Chris, are you there?
I'm here.
Fabulous.
Just need to share my screen.
So Jenny, can you allow Chris to share his screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Should be working now.
Yeah. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Chris Todd. I'm Director of Transport Action Network, which supports communities around the country who want to promote sustainable transport and to fight big, nasty road schemes or devastating bus cuts. We've just got a few minutes. I'm going to rattle through very briefly about electric vehicles, but just to sort of set the scene in a sense, partly done already. I mean, there is no doubt that something drastic needs to happen in the transport sector, given that since 1990 emissions have actually gone up, and from road transport they've probably just fallen very slightly, but really not really very much impact, and nothing like the levels of cuts that we need to see if we're to avoid, catastrophic climate change. I mean, just to put it into focus really, and this is not necessarily a science-based target, but it moves us beyond looking at 2050 and net zero, which is so far away it's very easy to ignore, and that's the 68% cut that the UK government has signed up to as part of the nationally determined contribution, which is part of the Paris Agreement. So that's 68% cut in emissions by 2030 on 1990 levels. And as I've already said, since they've hardly changed already, that a significant chunk has got to come, out of our current transport emissions. So what do we need to do about it? Everyone's talking about electric vehicles. They're the answer, aren't they? Because they emit zero carbon when we're driving around. Or do they? And that's the question. But first of all, what is an electric vehicle? I'll get the right thing. What is an electric car? Well, it might seem an obvious question and it might seem an obvious answer. It's one that runs on electricity, isn't it? Stupid. But there are actually a lot of different types of electric vehicles. And the one we're really going to look at today is the battery electric vehicle, i.e. in effect the all electric vehicle, as opposed to the hybrid, which are combinations of plug-ins or self-charging, which can run for short distances on electric, but use generally a petrol or diesel engine otherwise. So we're just focusing on the purely electric. And let's look at the lifetime fuel emissions. This is fuel emissions. So for a petrol engine car, you can see on the left over 40 tons of CO2 emitted every year. Every year over its lifetime. For a diesel, it's slightly better, but not much. And then you've got the two hybrids, self-charging and plug-in, and then the big drop down to the battery electric. Now, the reason it's not at zero is obviously because electricity isn't 100% renewable, but it's far, far better than all of the others. So surely that's got to be the answer. So we just need to go electric, don't we? Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, because when we look at lifetime emissions, so the life cycle greenhouse emissions associated with both the building of the car and from its actual use, we actually see that the difference isn't as great as we might have thought to start with. On the left, the conventional vehicles, You've got an average European car, and you've got a Toyota Prius Eco. Now you can see, compared to a Tesla Model 3, 75 kilowatt hour battery, that's the bigger battery engine, a bigger battery car. The emissions, the life cycle emissions, are not far different to the Toyota Prius. Now this is a bit like the worst case scenario because it's used with an Asian battery. Now an Asian battery makes a difference because the battery actually constitutes a huge amount of the energy for making the car. In Asia, they use a lot of coal in terms of their electricity generation and the power generation. So an Asian battery actually makes the vehicle appear less green. It has more emissions associated with it. Most Teslas actually have US built batteries, which have a higher mix of renewable energy. So the actual overall energy mix is less. And this makes it's not black and white, all of this. There are variations across the globe where things are sourced. That does affect the overall footprint. And just to give a sort of sample of that, if you take the Tesla with its 75 kilowatt hour battery from Asia, over 150,000 kilometers driven over its lifetime, if that was done in Germany, as you can see here, that would emit in total 22.5 tons of carbon. So better than a conventional vehicle, but still a significant chunk of carbon. If you compare that to that same vehicle with a US battery being driven in Norway, where all electricity is 100% renewable, it would only emit 10.2 tons of carbon over its lifetime. So you can see it's not straightforward. It depends where you are, where the energy is coming, etc. Now, obviously, as time goes on, we aim to sort of decarbonize the electricity generation side of things. So more places should become greener in the sense that the amount of fuel, both for manufacturing, but also in terms of recharging and using the vehicle, that should decline. The carbon footprint of that will decline over time. I mean, I think there's still some big question marks about what we define as renewable energy when we've got dracs burning wood and incinerators contributing to renewable energy. That would suggest actually our renewable energy mix isn't quite as good as is claimed. The other side of the coin is that actually we need more than just electrification. Even the government has admitted in the Transport Decarbonisation Plan that electrification of the vehicle fleet is not enough. Now, research that is being done by various bodies, University of Leeds, the CREDS department, Green Alliance, are suggesting that we need a 20 to 50% traffic reduction, again, depending on the various assumptions that you might make and the scenarios that you're trying to reach. Which carbon reduction target are you trying to use? Because things like the Committee on Climate Change, for example, they are perhaps more generous towards the government in the sense of the path we've got to follow. Others sort of promoting a science-based approach, or more science-based approach, would suggest actually we need to see more significant and sharper reductions in carbon dioxide emissions. And that's why you get a variety of potential figures. But even so, 20% at the smallest is a very significant change in behavior. 50% would be very, very radical indeed. But that's just a sort of a very quick resume, if you like, or introduction to some of the issues involved with electric vehicles and why we need to sort of look beyond them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. Succinctly put. Okay, so we're running a couple of minutes behind, so I'm going to move swiftly on to Carton Reid.
I'm
Carlton?
here somewhere. I'm
here. There you are. Fabulous. Excellent.
But not with InVision, it looks like.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Am I InVision yet there, Caspar?
Yep.
Hi.
Full screen now.
I
We can see.
myself.
We can all see. Brilliant. Thank you.
Right, okay, that's good. I can't see myself. I like that. Yeah, hi there, and I'm Carlton Reid. And first off, thanks ever so much to Caspar and to Jenny, who's doing the technical stuff, bringing me in and out, I guess, there somewhere. And let me just see if I can get my mouse to work. Here we go. My mouse is not quite working. Sorry about this, folks. Everything's really quite slow today. Which means I'm not going to be able to do my slides. Hang on, let's just see. Why would everything be slowing down with this?
So we can see the slide behind you at the moment.
Yeah, but I can't physically move them. Let me see if I can. Sorry about this.
Well, that's fine. Whilst you're doing that, Carlton, I'm just going to answer one of the questions that's come up in the chat, which is Chris Todd was talking about a traffic reduction there. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume you are talking about motor traffic being the 20 to 50% that needs to be reduced. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In which case, the largest slice of motor traffic is privately owned vehicles. So where we can make the biggest gains is by reducing the number of privately owned vehicles that are currently being used on the road.
I think there's also an issue around HGVs because although they're a smaller proportion of the traffic, they use a greater proportion of the fossil fuel.
Yep, true. And although the Haulage Association have just released a study, an electrification study. So for £16 billion, they are talking about having overhead electric lines to charge batteries from electric HGVs as they're going up and down the motorways, and then and then they'll also be carrying onboard batteries to allow them to do the last mile journey. So obviously, in my mind, that would be last mile journeys to small hubs on the edge of cities, when smaller vehicles, which are far safer in urban areas, can do their last mile of that section of the journey themselves. Carlton, how's it looking? So Carlton appears to have disappeared. Oh,
We lost him.
What did we say? So in which case, whilst we wait for Carlton to come back in and sort out his technical problems there, Carlton is an incredible historian of transport in the UK. He's written a couple of books. He also is a freelance journalist and writes for Forbes and The Guardian and everybody else, as we can see in the chat. Also, both Chris and Carlton and my Twitter handles are also in the chat if you want to search us down on Twitter and discuss anything with any of us in public there. We're all quite happy to do that. And I think we should talk. I know exactly what Carlton is going to be saying. So we will hope that he comes back in a second and fills us in with his lovely slides. But until then, we have got a whole load of questions coming in. So Chris and I will field some of these questions until Carlton comes back. So question number one from Anita: what evidence is there to say that electric vehicles contribute to PM 2.5 when they have regenerative braking? And please, can you explain what regenerative braking is? Chris, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, can I just pick up on the traffic reduction, because I can see those questions in the chat. Just to clarify, the traffic reduction being talked about will be in terms of vehicle kilometers. So it's not about car numbers per se, or even journeys necessarily. It's about vehicle kilometers. In terms of PM 2.5s, you're quite right. People have talked about you still got all the brake dust and the tyre wear. Now with regenerative braking, obviously the brake dust is very, very minimal because you only use generally the disc brakes in a sort of emergency situation. Most times that you'll be using the batteries and the electricity to slow the vehicle down. The remaining PM2.5s come from the fact that you've got tyre wear and road wear from the vehicle travelling on the road, and that will be thrown up by the vehicles and other vehicles as they go. The sort of the airflow around will cause that to sort of circulate. Having said that, the PM2.5s from sort of tyre and road wear, while not necessarily pleasant things, they're not necessarily quite as bad as those involved or coming out of combustion. So it's not necessarily, again, it's not black and white, but there will be PM2.5s associated with electric vehicles.
So yes, it's currently it's difficult to find a study that nails this down. There's lots of people writing about it, but nothing particularly scientific, authentic scientific studies nailing it down at the moment. We know that electric cars are heavier, so therefore they wear the tyres and they wear the road more. However, that has to be coupled with regenerative braking, which is obviously all of this technology is being developed very, very swiftly, which means that we haven't got the data that we need. Okay, and here's Carlton back in the room.
Caspar. And many apologies. My whole system went down at a great time for everything to go down. Nothing on my computer worked. Technology, hey? So I think I was saying thank you while I was doing that. And me and Chris also appear to be wearing the same T-shirt. We are two separate people. So I'm Carton Reid. And so first off, I've got to thank Caspar and Louise for inviting me onto this panel when the technology actually works. I'm a senior contributor. I shall now switch on to that one. Hopefully that works okay. I'm a senior contributor for sustainability for Forbes.com, but I also write for titles as different politically as the Mail online and the Guardian. So yeah, very different. And I've been a freelance writer since the mid-1980s, and this is me competing in the first World Mountain Bike Championships in 1987. I was a co-founder, by the way, so that's why I got picked. Bad decision. But I went on to found this magazine, which is On Your Bike, the family cycling magazine, non-lycra magazine, which sadly no longer exists. And I also founded Bicycle Business, which is still going strong. And I'm also an author. So my two recent books, wrote this one actually before the bike boom came about. It's called Bike Boom, very, very nicely and neatly. And then Roads Were Not Built for Cars, which kind of meshes in with today's topic. And what Chris was saying before when he was starting, so he discussed some of the environmental downsides to electric cars. But I'd like to stick to their girth, and I'll go on to a Tesla, and their girth and their heft, or as I like to put it, WWW. So first off, weight. Electric cars, as I just came in there, I heard Caspar saying, electric cars are heavier than standard cars. And as I'm sure Chris has also pointed out when I was away there, that's because they're packed with an awful lot of rare metals. And heavier cars will also lead to more road damage, which is incredibly costly to society and, of course, to anybody who hits those potholes. Motorists tend to get away with it. Cyclists sadly don't. And the next W is width. So this is a road full, and I'm sure you've all seen these kind of images before. This is a road full of standard cars. And this is a road full of electric cars. They're the same width. We're not solving congestion by moving to electric cars, far from it. And the final W is we have enough cars. We've got 40 million of them next year. And as I know Chris was saying before, we've got to reduce the amount of those cars by driving less. So we need more cycling, more walking, more travel by public transit. Electric cars definitely solve some problems. There's no getting away from that, but we can't replace 40 million internal combustion cars with 40 million electric cars. The planet, the grid, the roads will not cope. So more cycling, more walking, more public transit. Thank you.
Fabulous. That's exactly what we need, you know, for all of those, and far more active and public transport and far less car use is in a nutshell where we need to be moving very swiftly, which takes us beautifully on to the next question, which is, what will transport look like in the coming years if we imagine radical solutions in line with the transformation required? So just to give you a bit of context about the transformation required and the radical solutions, recently Sir David King has, who was one of the previous scientists for the government's head scientists, has been coming more directly with his quotes about how serious the climate and ecological crises are at the moment. And certainly in the latter part of this year, he's been quoting figures like 2 to 3 years, what we do in the next 2 to 3 years, or what we do in the next 3 to 4 years, or what we do in the next 5 years, depending upon where you hear these quotes, will affect the next millennia. So this is the sort of the radical changes that we would be looking for are definitely in line with what we saw during COVID. You know, we had the lockdown in COVID where everybody aligned behind the same message because we knew the outcome was dire, and all of a sudden we saw massive behavioural change happen almost overnight. And considering that the science is saying that the crises that are knocking on our door at the moment and worsening around the planet, including locally at the moment, are going to quite possibly dwarf what happened during COVID on a global scale. What are the transformations that we need to see happening very quickly in order to deal with our largest emitting sector, which, the reason we're here is because it is transport. Chris, do you want to go first?
I'll try. So just solve it like that would be great, wouldn't it? I mean, I think I've already said, I think you have to use something like traffic reduction to drive through the change. It gives you something clear that you've got to aim for. Mm-hmm. I see there's been a bit of discussion about e-bikes. I mean, research from CREDS at the University of Leeds has sort of shown that e-bikes actually show massive potential in switching people out of their cars. Their footprint overall in terms of lifetime, because the people can also move them more easily than a standard bike, so they actually use less fuel, i.e. food for the cyclist. So their overall footprint is actually smaller than a standard bike, amazingly, yet they can go further and allow you to do much more. We've really got to enable that sort of revolution to happen, and that means creating safe streets. And then you need to run that alongside greater support and innovation around public transport. I mean, the Austrians at the moment are talking about giving people access to public transport, all sorts, you know, all distance journeys for €3 a day. I mean, that would revolutionize people's approach to public transport. And those are the sorts of things that we've got to be doing now. You know, we've got to be creating safe streets and, you know, incentivizing use of public transport. And if we don't, we're just going to trundle along the same path that we are at the moment.
So what we're talking about then is public transport. It seems to be what you were saying there is public transport is city-based focus there. How do you think we should deal with public transport rurally?
Well, I often don't actually make the distinction between urban and rural. I think a lot of people do, and I think it's a mistake, because people in urban areas, less likely to have a car, actually want to access the countryside for services and particularly recreation. So they end up swamping rural areas with cars. And then the rural people in rural areas who need access to services, which often aren't generally provided apart from sort of local shopping, maybe a doctor, surgery, etc., aren't provided in their areas, drive into the urban areas, swamping the urban areas with cars. And actually what you need is that interurban connectivity to be resolved. That's been lost because of all the cuts to bus services over the years, the supported services. So people have been driven into their cars, or they've been left isolated, or they've had to move out of rural areas. Actually, so you can tackle social injustices with this as well. The go-to solution at the moment seems to be park and ride, but that actually makes the problem worse, because it only allows people driving in from rural areas to access the urban area. It does nothing for people in rural areas without access to a car, and it does nothing for urban areas trying to get out. So we do need to look at it differently. And I think we also need to learn from places like Denmark, where Copenhagen has been installing these sort of cycle superhighways right out into the rural areas. And now you're getting average distances cycled now of 9 miles or 15 kilometers on some of the routes. So showing the distances that can be covered. And we need those sorts of linkages as well from urban areas to rural areas and between rural areas as well. And if we can do that through either direct or segregated facilities or safer roads, then we'll start to tackle that problem.
Yeah, so I was just reading Motor City's latest book about Delft, and what they were saying was that during lockdown they were happy to cycle 15 miles to the next city to pick up the bits and pieces that they needed that they couldn't get in Delft, because of the protected cycling infrastructure that was there. Normally they wouldn't. They don't live with a car, so normally they'd be taking public transport. They couldn't because of the pandemic, so they just cycled because it's safe, basically. Carton, over to you. I'm just remembering a conversation I had with you recently where we were talking about traffic reduction, and you said, yeah, LTMs are great, but we just need them absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, so the story I did for The Guardian recently, which is Birmingham becoming one big low traffic neighborhood. We definitely need more cities to be going down that road, for want of a better term. But if we're going to be radical here and not pussyfoot around at all, and I guess with this kind of platform we are going to be more radical with Extinction Rebellion, then we've got to get it. And I'll kind of like take issue with what Chris said, but only slightly, and that is we've got to stop with the equity of provision. So I'm not a great believer in having a great motor road, a great footway for the pedestrian, great public transport, and a great cycleway for the cyclist. Because when you have everything equal, we know what happens. Motoring dominates. So we've actually got to be radical and not have that equity of provision. So no calling for cycleways unless you're also taking out a whole bunch of roads. And so where low traffic neighborhoods, I don't think they're incredibly radical at all. But where they come in is at least they take away some space from motorists. So an awful lot of where we're going to have to go in the future is something that politicians to date haven't really grasped. But we've got to take space away from motorists. And not just give it to other modes, because if you take away the space from motorists, the other modes will just naturally flood in. So I'm a great believer in being quite radical and taking stuff away, not just providing stuff, because there's so many examples around the world where when you give everybody equality, motoring just ends up dominating, because motoring is fantastic. It's in many places it can be swift, it's certainly comfortable, it's weatherproof, all sorts of fantastic reasons why motoring will naturally dominate. And so we've got to stop that domination by physically removing space.
Yes, so space on the roads, and also the other way, as lockdown showed, was regulation. You know, you make it you regulate so people cannot go outside and travel around. I'm not saying that's what we should be doing here, but we need to have a very we need to perhaps understand the differentiation between necessary and unnecessary journeys, and swiftly move to a position where the government says this journey is unnecessary, you cannot do it in a car, you have to do it on public transport or walk. It's at the same time, there's some wonderful examples that we've just been discussing here, making public transport free. Can you imagine how that would prioritize people's choices if they were able to get to Glasgow, for example, in November on the trains for free? That would...
Caspar, it is good. Don't get me wrong. That is fantastic. Luxembourg has that. All of this is fantastic. Yeah. In Luxembourg, it doesn't get people out of their cars. Providing free public transport is just a benefit to people who want to go on public transport.
Yeah.
Providing cycleways, yes, it will lead to more cycling, a little bit more cycling. It won't lead to mass cycling, but you take away the space, you take away not just the physical space that motorists, I'm a motorist, drive on, but physically take away car parking space, which is what Anne Hidalgo is doing in Paris. Many cities are doing this, is removing the amenities for cars. So what I'm trying to say, Caspar, don't just say these are the things we need to do as an alternative. It's like, yes, we can do that, but much, much more important is to physically take away the amenities, the enjoyment, all the different things that people have become absolutely reliant upon with motoring. And that's when the politicians are really going to have to step up, because you are taking something away that is incredibly valuable, incredibly precious to many people. But many cities are biting the bullet and are doing this. So Birmingham is doing it in a small way. Paris is doing it in their own small way. London even is doing it in their small way. Many cities are doing this, but you've got to take stuff away. I'm a big believer in a big, big stick, not just lots of nice, juicy carrots.
I totally agree. Absolutely agree. Ghent being another city that just changed overnight, didn't they? They drew a line in the sand, they made the city split up into sectors and said you cannot drive through these sectors. But part of what we need to be tackling in order to make these changes is, one of the reasons that the government is so entrenched in policy like this is the media, of course, who are at the moment attacking low traffic neighborhoods. We see all of our newspapers propped up by advertising revenue, and a lot of that advertising revenue is selling the freedom, in inverted commas, of new cars. So how do we tackle the media, Carton?
We'll go to Chris first, because I work for titles that benefit from petrochemicals. So go to Chris.
Thanks, Carton. I'd just like to pick up on something that Carl said. I mean, I don't think I'm talking about equity of leaving everything as it was. I mean, I think particularly when I'm talking about making roads safer, that can be done in all sorts of ways. And I totally agree that you've got to have sticks and carrots, but I think you do have to show people some hope and show people some carrots to allow the other stuff to come along at the same time or just after. And that was demonstrated with what happened in London, for example, with the acceptance of the need for change there and the introduction of the congestion charge. How do you media is not really my forte or strength, but I think, I suppose, we've seen, some of the sort of national papers recently come out and start claiming how green they are, because I think they've been sort of caught out with actually understanding or appreciating where the population are with regards to climate change. So I think, how do you tackle the national media, the mainstream media? I think it can be done in different ways, of course, but one of those, I think, is to keep talking to people about the benefits of the change that needs to happen, why we need to change, and encouraging people to be expressing their views as to that change, and really just sort of trying to create more and more discussion and debate and noise around all of these issues. Because while the media like to try and, in certain instances, dictate or nudge the conversation in different directions, if the vast majority of the population are not with them, and they feel, you know, they've suddenly realised that they're sort of getting out of kilter, that will help, you know, shift them and draw them back and potentially put them on the right path. I don't believe any of that's easy, but those are some of the things that we might need to look at.
So I mean, obviously speaking as one of the activists that blocked Broxbourne printing press, I'm wholly behind non-violent direct action targeting the media again. But you know, I think there is a little bit of a glimmer of hope with regard to low traffic neighborhoods. I think the positives of low traffic neighborhoods happen so quickly that once, you know, and I like the way that the consultations have been happening, so that they implement the low traffic neighborhood and running concurrently with the consultation, so you get to see what it's like, and very swiftly people realize how much safer, how much cleaner the air is, how less crashy the roads are. And I think, you know, that change happens so quickly that sometimes the it's difficult for the media to fight against that. I say, you know, and I'm talking from experience. When we were doing Stop Killing Cyclists actions in London, we didn't have any real opposition amongst the media. It started to come in now. You know, locally in Exeter, we've got a low traffic neighbourhood that's just gone to consultation at the moment, and Devon Live, which is our local Reach media outlet, has written in the last 2 weeks 2 articles that are opposing low traffic neighbourhoods. There's been nothing supporting them at all. But you know, what my hope is, like I'm saying, is that people will wake up with this low traffic neighbourhood and within a couple of days think, oh my God, this is lovely. There's no traffic out there. My kids can go out on the street and they can play. I can walk to the local shops, etc., etc.
Caspar, I think the local media, so the Reach titles and national media, will largely reflect the motoring point of view, and that's always been the case. You know, I'm a historian as well, and I look at, you know, publications from the 1930s where you see the journalists talking about, you know, cyclists as other. Even then, you know, people who walk were other. It was always motoring as a mainstream thing. So publications will tend to be pro-motoring. So you've got to kind of almost accept that's a given. So one of the reasons I write for the Mail is to get other points of view in there. So if I wasn't writing about cycling in the Mail, then maybe not many other people would. So it's good to get into those publications with those kind of messages. A bit easier in the Guardian, of course. You'll have, you know, half the staff there will be cycling to work, of course. But other publications, incredibly tough because of that pro-motoring bias. So, for instance, the article I did for the Guardian on Birmingham's low traffic neighbourhood, there was a tweet, and Wasim Zafar, who's the council lead, was included in this tweet, and it was picked up actually by Reach Title. So the Birmingham Live editorial team picked up on this, and were not very happy because a national newspaper, The Guardian, had picked up on what they considered like their local story, which they've done thousands of stories on this. But when you actually look at their coverage, virtually every single headline they've done on what Councillor Wasim Zafar is doing is negative. Virtually every one. There's just, whereas The Guardian comes in and the headline is about they're creating a low traffic, a city-sized, super-sized, low traffic neighborhood. And that's a positive headline. You go to the Birmingham Live website on the same day that the transport plan was unveiled, and it's just very negative about this particular A38 road potentially being closed. So that media will talk about a negative, a closure of a road to motorists. That publication will talk about the positives. So we need to get more of the positives. But, and the reason that Birmingham Live picked Wasim up on this was because I asked him a question, and I said, are the local media actually supportive of you, or are they neutral, or they're negative? And he said it's whatever gets the clicks on the day. And that is one of the basic problems. Negative stuff gets clicks. Taking roads away from motorists gets clicks. Lots of clean air, birdsong, that doesn't get clicks. So reach titles are incredibly bad at this. Many other titles are very bad at this. They're going to focus on what they assume is conflict and will get the clicks. The only way this will ever be cured is if nobody clicks into those kind of articles. But you're then talking about human nature, or reversing human nature. People, unfortunately, do like to read negative stories. They want to read about conflict, and that's why good newspapers, when they often come about, they just fall by the wayside. People want negativity, sadly.
So yes, I mean, just to completely clarify here, Carton, I didn't blockade Broxbourne to destroy the Murdoch press, the right-wing press. Without them, we need them on side talking about the massive transformation that we need to see very, very swiftly, because without them, it's going to be so much harder. So we need a little bit of a rebalance here, don't we? We need to, well, not rebalance, like you're just saying. I don't think there's ever been a balance in favor of positive news stories, but we need to somehow get the press to understand the very severe nature of this existential threat and write about it in a commensurate fashion. So, so to generate support, or at least to make people realize that that low traffic neighborhoods, for example, are not as bad as people think they are.
They're incredibly unradical. Low traffic neighborhoods are the basic thing you should be doing. They're not radical at all. It's just going back to like 10 years ago, when we didn't have Waze, we didn't have Google, where directing cars down residential streets. You would go down those streets if you're a local, I guess, but Waze is taking people who are not from the area down residential streets. So all low traffic neighborhoods is just taking us back 10 years and is the bare minimum. So low traffic neighborhoods, I don't see them as radical. I don't see them as something that the mainstream media should really be attacking, because they are the base level. We should not be thinking, they're the pinnacle. This is the base stuff we should be going for.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are into the last 15 minutes. So I am going to just switch over and ask a few of the questions that have been piling up as we've been chatting. So there's one here from Henry. Can we adjust the total life footprint of EVs by assuming 100% renewable electricity during manufacturing? Who wants to tackle that one first?
I will if you want. I mean, I think if we can decarbonize every single aspect of manufacturing, then yes, we will move towards a zero carbon footprint. But that doesn't mean the vehicles won't have a ecological footprint. And one of the issues being, for example, they've got a huge requirement for rare earth metals and other rare metals and minerals in the Earth system, and getting those can be incredibly damaging. So I think, yes, we can move towards carbon-free vehicles in the future, but I think they're quite a long way off. But we mustn't forget that there are other impacts. It's a bit like roads. There are far more impacts around roads than just carbon. There's the landscape impact, there's the severance, there's the noise pollution, the air pollution, etc. So, carbon is just one element of a bigger picture, and we mustn't forget that bigger picture.
Carton, have you got anything to add?
No, that's not my area of expertise. I think we should go on to other questions.
Fine. Okay. So what is the true cost of car dependency to the planet, society, and individuals? Thank you to Louise for that question.
Yeah, okay, well, that's a massive question. Deserves a massive answer, but clearly, all you've got to do is pick up the latest report from the IPCC. They're very clear. this is having and has had a major impact. As we know, transport is absolutely, one of the main reasons we have foul air. It's certainly one of the reasons we need to remove cars for all these different reasons, which you know well, and we know that the IPCC report is in agreement. It's very clear. You've got to reduce the amount of motoring, and it's only by tackling that and actually looking at what the IPCC report says that you'll actually understand that this is something that's critical, and we've got to. And government, I'm saying we here, governments have got to grasp the nettle here. They've got to actually follow through on what that recent report says, and hopefully also with what will be coming up at COP26. So there's a transport day. The Wednesday of COP26 is the transport day. It's then followed by a cities day, and those two streams, I would say, are obviously quite similar. They may share similar subjects, but I absolutely want to see how we discuss that exact dilemma at COP26, and how radical the delegates who are there are going to be, because we have got to be radical. So many of the measures that we tend to discuss are just they're going to tinker at the edges. We've really got to be quite radical, and we have got to start removing road space to motorists, removing the car parking, yes, incentivizing the other stuff, but removing the amenities of motoring is pretty key, and many cities are doing it. Let's not forget, this is not something that we're saying, nobody can do this, isn't this pie in the sky. Many cities are doing this. It just needs to be more of them.
So basically, we need to do what the Dutch have done in the last 50 years. We need to do that in the next decade. Basically, we look at what Mayor Hidalgo is doing in Paris, and that again is tinkering around the edges. That we need that on steroids to be happening in every single city in the UK, in Europe, in the world, and we need that to be sped up far, far faster than it is happening currently.
Yes,
is what I'm hearing. I mean, yes, of course, there is, all of the externalities that come with car dependency at the moment. So, we've got 4 million kids that suffer from asthma in this country, and the majority of the reason behind that is from pollution from transport. We've got an obesity crisis. We spend billions of pounds on inactivity and lung disease in this country because of our transport policies. So, there's and what is it? 70% of deforestation is for rubber. 70% of deforestation for rubber is to make tires for cars. So there's all of these other externalities that happen as well. Okay, let's move on. Let's pick another question here. We've done. Okay. Okay, this one's a linear question. Which town, city is a possible next candidate for a supersized LTN in the UK, asks Stephen.
Go for Chris, because I talk last, so.
Yes, Chris.
Well, I was going to say go for Carton, because he's the one.
I would just say all of them.
Yes, I would say all of them as well. I don't think there is any reason in the crisis that we are to be
The neat thing about Birmingham, and the reason I major on it in The Guardian, is it's iconic. So yes, we need all cities to go like this, but it's when Birmingham is the UK's Detroit. It's car central, Spaghetti Junction, etc. It's just been cars in Birmingham for the last 80 years. So the fact that Birmingham is going to change, that had worldwide resonance. I know there's people around the world read that story because it's iconic. So yes, I want every single city to have low traffic neighborhoods, to be one big low traffic neighborhood. So they restrict cars, not just into the center, but into the outlying suburbs too. But when iconic cities do it, that helps all those other cities also do it. So if Birmingham can do it, pretty much any city can do it.
And the other thing I would say is not only do they need to be implementing LTNs, they need to be implementing workplace parking levies, congestion charges, ultra low emission zones, massively increasing their protected network of cycling and walking, cycling infrastructure, and also investing massive amounts in public transport, probably buses, I think, because buses can be it's far quicker. We've got the infrastructure we need for buses already, which is the roads. We've got a great road network. You know, it's far easier to create a fleet of buses, build a fleet of buses, and get them operating very quickly. So yes, the answer is all of it, everywhere, please. Right, one last quick question before we finish up. So. That's really quite an interesting question. Okay, so this is, I'm not sure how this is going to go down here, but let's see. The other two effects that are very important is Jevons paradox. How do we deal with Jevons paradox then in our current situation? So, you know, the Jevons paradox is if you are given more technology, that means you need more technology quicker. And it's, you know, I think it's again, one of the things that we are constantly battling within, certainly with regard to transport, is people's need. People feel that they conflate the issue with personal transport with personal car journeys, and they're given all of this technology, and they just want more and more and more of it. So, you know, and obviously what we need to be doing is working out how to do more with less, so to speak. I think
that's a toughie, because, you know, we are using Zoom. Okay, that's a technology, and it's connecting us. So technology per se isn't bad. There are many good uses for technology, but there are also many technologies that are clearly not good for us. You touched upon obesity, you touched upon air quality, but there's the technologies that are good for us, no reason to be afraid of them. So I think you come across kind of potentially as a Luddite if you say you've got to cycle everywhere, you've got to walk everywhere, and we mustn't use any form of modern technology. So that's not really what we're saying, because we are using a modern technology, and you use the Roads Rebellion people use modern technology to group together and to protest. So there are forms of technology which are fantastic, and we don't have to worry about it. It's harnessing those technologies for the betterment of society as a whole. And it's up to, I guess, governments to and this is it's a bit of a downside here with the current government. We need governments to recognize which are the good technologies, which are the bad technologies, and to clamp down on the bad technologies. But who's to say what's good and what's bad? This is where it comes down to, very, hard moral issues, which is such a toughie.
Thankfully, of course, we're the most adaptable thing on the planet. And although it's not looking good for us at the moment, we still do have a diminishing route out of this, but there is still a route out of this. Okay, so we have got a couple of minutes left. So I'm just going to tie up by saying our next webinar, we have yet to decide a date for our next webinar, but we would welcome you to join us for our next webinar on 15-minute cities. We also would welcome you any support in our XR Roads Rebellion actions. At the moment, we're currently targeting SUVs. So we need specifically SUV advertising. and the RIS2 road building program, and RIS3 and RIS4, which are so destructive, and which Chris Todd is doing an amazing work with Transport Action Network. And I would like to say thank you very much to Carlton Reid and Chris Todd, who have been discussing these questions wonderfully with us tonight. And I hope to see you all again very soon.